Temptation of Jesus in the desert. If I asked you all to raise your hand if today was the first time that you heard the story, my guess is that there would be very few, if any, hands that go up. We read the story in one of its versions on the first Sunday of Lent every year, how Jesus, after his baptism, is led by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness to prepare himself for his public ministry and to prepare himself for his journey to Calvary. And it's there in the desert he meets the enemy, Satan, and his temptations. You know, we're taught that Jesus always knew he had a special relationship with God and that he was chosen by God to perform a specific mission. We remember reading not too long ago about Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River when he heard the words, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." These words were an indication, a verification, in fact, that he was the anointed one, and it was time to begin his public ministry, his job of being a Messiah. You have to wonder how often he must have prayed for that sign in those days that he worked in the carpenter shop. Then it says that the Spirit led him into the desert. Now this desert was no place to begin a public ministry. It was a hot and a dry place. It was a desolate and a barren place. And it was an isolated place. A place where there would be no one else. No one else would want to go there. And so it was a place well suited for the task that Jesus had before him, to pray and to discern what the mission for God's anointed one was and how he was being called to fulfill it. And then comes Satan with his temptations. How do you go about being a Messiah? Can he be a Messiah by bringing wealth and prosperity to the people who follow him? Can he be a Messiah by raising an army of followers to free his nation from the shackles of oppression and servitude? Can he be a Messiah by asking God to allow him to perform spectacular deeds and wondrous works and thus wow the people into following him? You know, sometimes we think that these temptations were a one-and-done thing for Jesus, that he faced the devil and defeated him, and so put those temptations to rest. But we know from our own experiences that that's not how temptations work, don't we? We overcome temptations one day, but then the next month, next week, even the next day, that temptation is right back again. That's because Satan doesn't weave his temptations out of nothing. He bases them on the people, the circumstances, and the culture that surrounds us. Jesus was a Jew in a time of history in which there were many notions of what the Messiah would do when he came. The Messiah would bring about a world of prosperity and wealth where all could live in peace. The Messiah would dispel the Roman occupiers from Israel and create a land of peace. The Messiah would, by signs and wonders, create a new world in which all nations would become subservient to the law of Moses. You know, these temptations of Jesus, they didn't disappear after he left the desert. He was tempted every day of his life. He was tempted by the Pharisees when they asked him for a sign. How tempting it must have been to perform some wondrous miracle that all the world would see to convince him that, yes, he was the Messiah. The crowds tempted him when they wanted to carry him into Jerusalem and make him a king. How easy it would have been for him to allow them to carry him into Jerusalem and crown him ruler of all. Even the apostles, his closest friends, tempted him when they wanted to deny the necessity of the cross and to sit on his right, on his left when he attained his crown of glory. And he had to tell him, "Get behind me, Satan." No, temptations weren't over when Jesus left the desert. There were temptations all around him throughout his whole life. Just as we are faced with temptations throughout all the days of our lives. Because temptations aren't concocted somewhere in the back caverns of hell. They are formed in the world around us, in the culture, in the circumstances in which we live every day of our lives. How hard it is for us to keep holy the Sabbath when all the world around us is bustling about as normal business. How often have we fallen prey to the lure of commercialism and consumerism, and we find so many things in our closets and cupboards that we don't need and that we rarely use? How often do we make our own comfort and our own conveniences the main motivator of our day? Because that's what the world tells us to do. Then there are those darker things in the world, the lure of sexual promiscuity, the anger and violence that seem to be so prevalent in our world, the bigotry and the racism throughout the world that still flourishes around us, even in this day and age. We are all being touched by these things. We are all being tempted, and the world is not going to stop tempting us. Satan is still very much at work. Last Wednesday, when Father signed us with ashes, he said these words: "Turn away from sin and be faithful to the gospel." These are easy words to say, but they're much harder to live up to. Because when we turn away from sin, we so often are turning away from the world around us. We are turning away from the need for constant stimulation and entertainment, and we're turning towards periods of prayer and meditation. We are turning away from the shopping and the money spending for our own gratification toward a spirit of poverty and generosity to those in need. We are turning away from the anger and the vengeance which the world calls justice, and returning towards the compassion and the mercy of God. When we are being faithful to the gospel, we are using these gifts and talents that we have been given not for our own good, but for the good of others. For after all, Jesus did feed the 5,000 with just a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. He did perform powerful miracles and signs. But he didn't do it for his own self-aggrandizement, but he did them in the service of others. Jesus' path is not an easy path to follow, because the world is always there to lead us astray. During this Lenten season, let us strive to take a closer look at ourselves, to see more clearly those areas in our lives in which we have fallen prey to the temptations of the world, and to ask God for the grace to turn away from the lure of sin, but more importantly, to acknowledge our weaknesses and our failures, and to ask God for his mercy and for his forgiveness.